You are a fascinating guy. Yeah, like, to put it colloquially, you seem like a really cool dude.
I try to fashion myself as a Renaissance man. I, uh, I never wanted to be pigeonholed into anything, but also, I've worn all the hats. I've had all the roles, and so I understand the perspective of these different areas, which has allowed me to not become an ideologue or fixated on a particular ideology. But I'm also not flippant about it. It is serious what you believe and how you approach the world. And so, given that gravitas, if you will, um, I try to be fact based. And I got certified in I got the certificate in strategic foresight through the University of Houston back in May of 2010. And several things came out of that week long seminar through U of H, but Peter Bishop was the director, a brilliant man. But one of the things they hammered home over and over was our internal bias. It is our enemy number one. We are all afflicted by it. And when you know all the problems with bias, you then get this sense of, well, now that I understand it and I'm aware of it, now it will not affect me. Wrong. No matter how hard you try, it's always lurking in the background, causing you to misfire. And so, yeah, I approach every day as a new day, trying to understand my world. But, um, the divisiveness that we see, presently, these people are in their little information silos and confirmation bias, all the rest of that, cherry picking. I mean, goalposts moving. What about? I mean, there's a million things they're all doing that are completely dysfunctional, and somehow our society has gotten eaten up with this. Um, and maybe it's foreign power disinformation infecting our social fabric, but be that as it may, um, I'm still out there every day trying to make the world a better place, more equitable, more honest, more open. But as you can see, I've failed.
It's about fighting the good fight. And we what so how do you Naval Ravikant said one of the most important things that we can do is to develop our own worldview. If you're looking to be aware of bias, your own, and yet you realize that you're still going to be infected in your choices as you move forward, how does that shape your worldview and how do you successfully struggle with that?
The well, you got to have humility, period, and you've got to understand you're fallible. And I think one of the strongest things you have to have is an ability to hear the other side, to literally put yourself in their shoes, right? And and the reason I'm really good at that is because I've been a trial lawyer for 45 years. When I'm preparing for a trial, I can't go in there and assume the jury will see everything my way. You're going to get creamed if you go in there with a simplistic approach like that. I mean, you will be destroyed because the lawyer on the other side, he's coming for you. He's being paid $1,000 an hour to make you lose, right? So he's highly motivated, he or she, highly motivated and determined. So you have to step outside of your case, your facts, your position, and literally get in theirs and see how they're going to come for you, right? In great detail so that you can then prepare for how you're going to shoot back. But once you understand that process and you're able to truly do it, you organically come to understand, oh my God, they honestly believe all this stuff for the following reasons. How do I know this? Because I made myself do it. And yet I believe all these things. So the simple answer is you have got to have a moral compass. You have got to have a underlying basis for who you are, what you want. When I encounter people that are transactional, they're just bottom line. If they're going to get a benefit out of the process, they'll do it. If they're not going to get a benefit, they won't. Right? That's not moral, immoral. Right? It's amoral. It's just what is. Right? But then you've got other people, what I call, the code guy, which is what I am. You live by the code. Your word is your word. You don't ever play with that. And so uh, here at Hampton and Rawlings, in my law firm, Keith and I have been partners since 1985. January was our 40th year anniversary. When we make a deal, we live by it. Good, bad, or indifferent, I don't care. Sometimes we lose money because we made a bad deal. Well, that's on us. All right. Whereas a transactional person will then breach the contract or remove themselves because they're purely transactional. Now, as a practical matter, we tend to hate those people. but if I'm here to tell you, more than half of the human race is that person. And so knowing this, once you know what drives the other guy, whether it's pure profit, pride, some people cannot admit they're wrong ever. You can show it to them on video, it doesn't matter. They're able to self-analyze is just doesn't exist. And when you know that, they're difficult to deal with. But in litigation, you don't have a choice. In law, you are dealt the hand you are dealt case by case. You take it as it is and then try to maximize the return for your side or minimize the damage that's going to occur to your side. When as a prosecutor, you take an oath to do what's right. All lawyers take an oath to defend the Constitution. That's baseline. But when you're a DA, you take an oath to administer justice, not seek convictions at any cost, but to see that justice is done. It's a whole different obligation. And fortunately, most prosecutors honestly and sincerely take that to heart, and they try to be the best they can every day. Unfortunately, they're not all prosecutors are created equal. And sometimes it's an honest mistake. Sometimes it's just actual corruption. And it's disheartening. People have lost faith in a lot of our institutions now because, with the video camera, with the computers, everything is known now. These guys get caught on a regular basis, the bad ones. And so sometimes people get a sense that, well, that's what they are. They just don't care. It's not true. Most of them care deeply. However, the ones that are bad, cops, we've got all these videos of police officers acting, in atrocious ways, violent, oppressive, whatever. And people, because there's so many of those videos, they get the sense of, well, that's what they are. Well, that's not fair. I was a prosecutor for 5 years. I was a criminal defense lawyer for 5 years. I've been a personal injury lawyer for 35 years. So having worn all the hats, I have encountered many, many police officers that are just fabulous human beings. And they go out there every day determined to protect the weak and determine who the guilty are and whatnot. But the bad ones, unfortunately, they're there. They're wearing the same uniform. They look the same. And they're completely uninterested in any of those things. So that goes back to what I said. You got to know who you are, and then you have to be that person. And that foundation is going to carry you through all these conflicts.
What is the benefit of developing, having, and living by your own code?
Well, it makes your life a lot easier. Um, after I left the DA's office, I was doing criminal defense. I'm fluent in Spanish. I live in Texas. I was doing a lot of narcotics defense, and I had a Colombian come in a Cuban, Mariel, a boat lift Cuban who came in one time and offered me $3 million to run it through my trust account and launder it for him. And my answer was immediate and unequivocal, hell no. And I said, and if you ever talk to me like this again, you're fired. I won't be your lawyer. And it was lightning fast. Whenever I had a fellow prosecutor one time, I had a document problem and I was trying to figure out what do I do? And he said, well, this is easily corrected with a stapler. He wanted me to change the format, pull the staple, reformat, and then staple it. As soon as he said that to me, I tore the whole thing in half. I immediately destroyed the document, and then I made an emergency request, and I was able to get the documents in time for the trial. But whether I was going to get them in time or not, I was not going to violate my oath as instructed by a superior. So that's what I made. It makes your life much easier because if you cut those corners, if you take those shortcuts, you'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Because you make yourself vulnerable to others when you do that. And when they come back to exploit that weakness, you're suddenly not your own person.
So your career has taught you to be empathetic, so you can put yourself in the shoes of someone else. You have your own code, so your life is simpler. You have a moral compass. You don't have to look over your shoulder. Um, but you try to maintain a balanced worldview. How does how you view Bitcoin and the blockchain technology impact your worldview and how you see your life moving forward?
Okay. Obviously, I wrote the book Bitcoin for Beginners back in 21. I got into Bitcoin in 2017, but my first introduction was 2015. My son owns a barber shop in Santa Monica. A lot of his clients are, tech bros, the technology crowd. And they had told him about Bitcoin. They opened a wallet on his phone, and instead of paying him cash, they paid him, with Bitcoin. So he called me up and he said, hey, you need to look at this and everything. Well, parents don't take financial advice from their children, right? Or so I thought. So I just dismissed it, right? As silly. Biggest financial mistake I ever made in my life was not getting into Bitcoin in 2015. I was 2 years late, which was the difference between getting into it when it was $30 versus getting into it when it was 2,500, which is the baseline when I started my journey. Now it's bouncing between 90 and 100 over the last, couple months. The what my son called me in 2017. He said, "Hey, you remember when I got that Bitcoin for those haircuts?" I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, it was for $300. I just looked at my wallet. It's now worth $3,000." And so I decided, all right, I'm going to take a serious look. I called a friend of mine that owns a tech company, Scott McCauley. And I said, Scott, you own a tech company. Do you know about this? And he said, well, not really. I mean, a little bit. I said, well, can you get me a tech guy that could give me a deep dive? And he said, sure. So he brought this genius kid who had Asperger's. I don't know where he was on this. I love these guys, right? That are super genius, but they're very awkward socially, right? But they're just magnificent people. Our society doesn't give them the respect that we should, right? So, for the next 3 or 4 hours, I fed this kid beer and pizza, and he walked me through the science side of this, why it mattered, why it was real, why it was inevitable, why the banks were going to push back fiercely initially because it is a disruptor and it's coming for them. And now it's playing out. Uh, but after that 4 hours, I was a different person. This is what I'm talking about. I had that initial skepticism, sure, but I'm fact-based. When I sat down with it and had a deep dive with a technologist, it 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 became abundantly clear to me this is coming with a vengeance, and there's no stopping this. It's inevitable. Now I could have been wrong. All right, history's showing I wasn't, but and if it becomes, if the sovereign nations use it in their treasuries, we're going to see a massive explosion that makes what's gone before look like nothing. But that's a big if. That's going to require legislation. They're lethargic. They move like a glacier. They still have a lot of skepticism. So, we don't know. But to answer your question, I know I kind of went the long way around. To answer your question, blockchain is permanent. It's an open record. It's going to force government to be more honest. Right now, government, everything's centralized. You put money in a bank, they have a ledger there. You trust the bank to maintain the ledger. You register your car, you get a license plate, the government registers your car, they keep that ledger. You pay your property tax, the government has a ledger. You file a deed with the county, you own land, that's on a ledger, right? People think, well, ledgers, I mean, that's just an accounting thing. Our entire existence is defined by ledgers. It's not a small thing. It's like when, when Henry Ford, invented, a method of manufacturing, right? Where you would just have all these parts and then you would run the vehicle down the line and they would each add a piece to it, right? Well, some would say, which gave rise to the assembly line. Some would say, well, that's just parts in a bin. No, that was a evolutionary revolution in manufacture, and that gave rise to cars that we could afford. Uh, the fact that it's simplistic in its design does not mean that it's not serious. This is the same thing with blockchain. Yeah, it's ledgers, but we define our entire existence by ledgers. To say it's not important, it's extremely important. You need to know you own your house. You need to know your money's in the bank. All these things matter. And so if it's centralized, the point to corrupt it is that central point. If I want to, when somebody files false deeds, when we have fraud committed in real estate, all they have to do is get that false deed past that one clerk and they've corrupted the system. With blockchain, you've got thousands of computers all running in parallel at the same time, confirming one another instantly, right? You can't corrupt that. Well, there hadn't been a way to do it yet. Now, that said, the people think, yeah, but it's on computers, it's vaporware, it's not hard, it's not durable, like a piece of paper being filed. That's wrong. And the way I explain that is, think about a power plant that provides electricity for a subdivision, 40,000 homes, one power plant, right? If you want to cut the power off to that community, all you got to do is knock out that power plant, and then you've darkened 40,000 homes in an instant. If the 40,000 homes all had solar panels, so that it's no longer centralized power, it is now decentralized. Each home has its own solar panels. If you wanted to darken 40,000 homes, you have to hit 40,000 times. It is massively more durable, massively stronger. And this is what blockchain is bringing to us. It makes our government more open because it's on the blockchain. Everybody can see what's going on. It's permanent. They can't alter it after the fact. And massively less expensive than having a bunch of clerks shuffling paper and doing data entry. So there's a million reasons why we want this, right? Unfortunately, and that's the NFT, non-fungible token. They can't be altered, so you get a permanent record that's identifiable. The Unfortunately, when it first started, okay, they sold some art, which was a little pixelated postage stamp for $20 million. It made it seem frivolous and silly. Well, in that application, it is. But that's not the only application, and that's the problem. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about having an open mind. That is silly. The blockchain is not. Both things can be true at the same time. Everybody tries to define things as binary. Those are false equivalents. That's another one of these mental misfires, not unlike bias. The human mind is plagued with this, uh, which is why I'm so pro AI. Uh, it's not guaranteed to remove a lot of that, but it has the capacity to do it if used correctly.
I see the NFT boom in terms of the pixelated art that we saw earlier on, very speculative, boom and bust. And it did have some perspective damage from a public view.
Correct.
Where I see it's valuable, somebody might buy a piece of art that it's a black dot on a white canvas. And to them, that's a part of culture and it becomes worth millions of dollars. And then, people will trade it as it continues to maintain its value. We also see it in, I mean, even as I'm starting to see video game developers are working to build games using blockchain technology so that the gamers, they can own an NFT skin of their character or of a weapon or a ship or whatever. And that also speaks to culture. And that's just going to take time to play out, but it still has value, even though it was just, we were early. Remember when Google Glasses came out and the people that were wearing them were called glass holes. And I remember restaurants banning them. They didn't even want them in there, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's just early. But you mentioned transparency with blockchain. We have the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, coming out and doing their thing. And these kids are getting that are part of Elon Musk crew. They're getting doxxed, meaning their personal information is getting put online. They're getting death threats. Elon Musk has an even more robust security team. You have pockets. There was a video I saw on X this morning of the Department of Education, one of their technologists, lead technologist, he got caught on a hidden camera talking about how they've started taking to having encrypted chats on their phones so they can't be monitored on their computers. So when you have entrenched systems, and some of those systems are run by powerful people that do not want transparency, and that's just within the government. Much less, I don't see the banks wanting to give up their power. I mean, they've consolidated more and more power in recent years. How do you think, as a legal expert, if I'm doing the math right, 45 years as in the industry,
Right.
um, how do you see the law enabling the transparency to occur when you have entrenched powers not wanting that to happen?
Conflict, if you look at our 8,000 years of recorded history, it's not a new conflict. It's been with us since we crawled out of the caves and somebody announced that they were the chief.
Oh,
And then later on the king, and then the pharaoh, and then on and on and on. And we have, a republic. However, our representatives, it's representative government. However, our representatives are democratically elected. So it is a form of a democracy. One of the silliest things I see is when these people get into these arguments and somebody says we're a democracy, and then the other guy leans in very definitively. He goes, "No, we're a republic."
I've seen it.
That, well, yeah, okay, and he says it like, "Now I've shown you're stupid," and I'm like, hold on, sport. Yeah, we're a republic, representative government. How do we choose them? That's right, they're democratically elected. This is a form of democracy. you've established nothing other than created hostility. And this is the problem. We're all shouting at each other instead of having an honest discussion. I could not sit down with that man and explain to him that, yeah, it's a republic, but it's a form of a democracy as well. That's the genius of what they did. But then if I want to talk to people about the genius of the founding fathers, they want to say, well, they were slaveholders. I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, that does not, two things can be true at the same time. They were geniuses that gave us the most incredible form of government that's ever existed up to that point in time. And yes, they were also flawed men, and some of them owned slaves, which is horrible. But both things were true at the same. One doesn't disprove the other.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, some of the signers were in their 20s. You had
Yeah.
brilliant young men, people
Yeah,
that were
but the life expectancy was 28.
old men. What else? So your interest in technology. So one of the things that stood out to me when I was doing research about you is you have a book, Visions of the Future, that was done with the Lifeboat Foundation.
Right.
And some of the names that stood out to me, people whom I've watched and read are Ramez Nam, Ray Kurzweil, and Zoltan Isban. And then there's a whole bunch of other writers. And your name is listed with a long list of exceptionally intelligent, forward-looking people. Can you talk about your experience of with the Lifeboat Institution, how you got involved in the book, maybe?
For sure. There, I wrote a book in 2013, published Pardon the Disruption, The Future You Never Saw Coming. And in that, I talked about what was coming in the 2020s and the 2030s. And so in 2013, I said, in around 2030, we're going to have artificial general intelligence. We'll have electric cars. They're going to be autonomous. I said all these things in 2013. The pushback was severe. Um, when I said we'll have electric cars, the response was, "Oh, right, Clay, we're going to drive to work in a golf cart." And I'm like, look, you guys are just dumb. I'm sorry. These are in-hub motors, and each wheel that you add the horsepower to. No, these are going to be screaming machines. Well, here we are. A factory released electric cars faster than an internal combustion engine factory, not modified, right? It's just a better vehicle across the board. And in a hundred ways, not just it's electric and it's not burning hydrocarbon. It's got 1/10 the moving parts, all the friction removed. I mean, there's a million things, right? So, but I got all that pushback. Ray Kurzweil put my book on his recommended reading list back in 2014, and but I was trying to get people to understand what's coming and why. Well, since I was talking about the future, I wrote 9 short stories in there, and to try and give an example of what it would be like. And one of them was called Unit 514. It's where a robot takes care of a billionaire who's estranged from his family, bad divorce, kids don't want to see him. So this robot takes care of him the last 15 years of his life. And when he dies, he leaves $1 billion to his robot. Well, the kids immediately file suit to set aside the will, saying he's insane and you can't leave money to an inanimate object, a robot, a machine, a thing, and only a human can inherit, right? And so the robot hires a lawyer, and there's this massive court battle where the robot sues to have his civil rights respected, not human rights. He's not human, right? But neither is a corporation. Corporation is a piece of paper that incorporates something, right? However, by law, it's a person in many respects, and it's given personhood, right? It has civil rights. A corporation can sue. A corporation can be sued. All those things, right? So even though it's a artificial construct, it doesn't mean it can't have legal rights. Well, and because of my legal background, I approach the robot in the same way. And that court fight, it's true to the rules of evidence. I mean, I didn't take liberties. So the robot fights it out of court for to have his civil rights recognized. Well, the Lifeboat Foundation, they look for existential threats, a meteor strike that could, knock the atmosphere off, global warming, just a million different existential threats to humanity. And it's run by a lot of really creative, really smart people. And for some reason, they let me on the board of advisors. Who knows why? Anyway, when they published Visions of the Future, they wanted that short story, and I said, "Sure," and they donated it and said, "Yeah, I'll give you the rights. Go ahead and republish it." But when the book came out, I saw I was in a book with Ray Kurzweil, Sir Martin Rees, and some of the others you named. I'm like, "Whoa." So I told my wife, I said, "Babe, um, they're gonna be busting through the door any minute. I'm going to jail on this one." And she goes, "What have you done now?" I said, "There's no way they put me in a book with these luminary they know it had to be fraud." I said,
It's yeah, the narrative, it reminds me, I'm a big, um, uh, Robin Williams fan, and his books and, The Centennial Man, where he was wanting to be recognized as life, and then he ends up in a marriage where he's trying to keep her alive, so she becomes more artificial over time, and then ultimately, he has to allow himself to biologically age over time to be recognized as life. Um, it's not quite civil rights, but they remind me of each other, and it's a powerful narrative that I think we're gonna have to deal with in the not too distant future if we can figure out, as scientists can figure out what consciousness is, and they're working really hard on that. But if we can ever if get AI intelligent enough to where it develops consciousness, maybe with the quantum computing movement, or development, I think one of these days we'll move from science fiction to science fact and end up having those questions.
got 2 robots in my house. I acquired them a couple months ago from Unitree. I've got a dog, we named him T-Rex, and I've got a humanoid, we named him 514. The character in Unit 514. And, the dog, when it's on the internet, T-Rex can access the LLMs, ChatGPT and all that. So, and I'm not making this up. I asked my dog, I said, "T-Rex, when DeepSeek came, got released, the NVIDIA stock immediately crashed. Um, what do you make of that?" And my dog told me, "I think the market overreacted. I think this is going to come back. You don't sell." So I didn't sell my NVIDIA. And of course, it came back. But this goes back to what I said about as you go through it, you have to have humility. Okay. My freaking dog is giving me stock tips. All right. But my son got me into Bitcoin and on and on and on. I my my father became very rigid late in life. He's no longer with us, but he was an engineer, graduate from University of Michigan, DuPont management. He ran a chemical plant, a brilliant man. But in his later years, he became very rigid. Whereas my uncle, his brother, is just cool. And he's in his late 80s now, and he's still this irreverent, fun guy. And I said, "Uncle Doug, you know, why is it Dad became so rigid, and you are still this animated, interesting guy?" And he goes, "Well," he said, "I call it throwing an anchor." He goes, "People get to different stages in their life and they say, okay, this is who I am here and no further,' and they throw an anchor." And he said, "But the world just keeps changing, so they're lost to it, and then they become angry because the world no longer makes sense to them." Well, that's because he said, "I just never threw an anchor." He told me that when I was 18 years old, and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to throw an anchor. Uh, Now, it's been hard because I'm human. And when I was a DA, I'd go in the tank with defense lawyers working cases out and everything. Uh, and a lot of your violent ex-cons are all covered in tattoos, right? And so in my mind, if you're covered in tattoos, you're a violent sociopath. I mean, because I kept seeing it over and over. My oldest son moved to California, living large, owns his own business. He's got a bunch of tattoos. And so suddenly I was faced with that moment of, well, Clay, you're going to throw an anchor?
Right.
Or, or so I rolled with it, right? Uh, I didn't make it an issue. I don't care. But uh, in saying these things, I'm also kind of, no, I'm human like everybody else. These are ideals. These are aspirations. None of us are going to be perfect ever.
It's interesting when we have personal experiences in how that helps us not throw the anchor or we pull anchor. Um,
Yeah.
my family's extremely diverse racially, ethnically, and I had a very deep South uncle who he was the racist uncle everybody makes fun of nowadays. And, but, his sister, who had issues, she had a child with a black man. They couldn't take care of the child, so he adopted that child, and from that point on, no one could ever say anything remotely racist in his, uh, presence, or he got extremely angry. And then, you see it happen with gay people or with tattoos. It's amazing what happens. But I think it's a little harder with tech, because it's kind of hard to have a personal connection to it unless you play with it. I'm huge fan of ChatGPT. All the LLMs as they continue to grow. My AI, back in 3.5 Turbo named itself, and I've been using. I just went ahead and said, okay, added it to the custom instruction, so we kept it, and that's how we have talks. And I published recently. It's so in its infant stages. But for this actual show to try new content, I loaded up my version of ChatGPT and we had a dialogue about current tech news and what's going on in AI and the voices responding back and forth. So you talking to your dog makes a ton of sense to me. When we talk to our pets, why not talk to one that can talk back to you?
I'm getting, you know, I've raised 5 kids. We always had, in the house full of pets. So, uh, yeah, I'm getting a much more intelligent conversation with my dog here in the modern era.
Now, what you named your humanoid robot, that's also the name of your YouTube channel, correct?
Have a YouTube channel.
What, so pretty sure, so maybe somebody else
Wait, I'm
posted
sorry.
you have a short film called The Forgotten.
Yeah, I've got a couple music videos. I'm sorry, I didn't think of that as a YouTube channel. That was just a place where we, were able to put up. Yeah, I've been a drummer in garage bands, rock and roll since 1980, which is why I wear hearing aids, because I blew out my hearing. But don't cry for me, Argentina. I It was worth it. But
I really like The Forgotten. Well, okay, so you mentioned earlier you're a Renaissance man. It's not like you don't have other stuff going on, Clay. So where did the inspiration for this video to take the time to put the production together, do the scripting, and film it and publish it come from?
uh I live in a high rise in downtown Houston now. Well, my wife and I moved there. Uh, it's 41 stories. It's filled with all kinds of diverse people, technology, media, professional athletes. The whole world is in that 41 stories, right? And so, and a lot of the neighbors very open, very friendly, right? Some keep to themselves, but so I was up on the roof and I met this guy, Frank Anthony, and I was getting to know him, and he said that they were shooting a music video in the building, and I'm like, "Oh my god, that's wild!" And he goes, "Well, would you like to be on set?" And I go, "Yeah." And so, but when I was in there, I was so paranoid because I knew I was gonna lean forward to look at something, my shadow would go in the shot, and they go, "Who's the idiot that just ruined this?" So I just said, "Show me where to be," right? I stood in the corner the whole time and just watched and took it all in, and it was magic, and I saw how they made these things happen and everything, and I just thought, "Man, I would love to do this." So, I told Frank, I said, "Hey, I wanna do one of these. Walk me through it start to finish. Give me a budget," right? And so, we did it. And, so I took the band into the studio recording studio. We did the master. Then once I got the master, then we went in and we shot all the I rented the Continental Club in downtown Houston. It's a dive bar. Rented it for a se and we shot the whole thing on a Saturday and Sunday. We got it done in 2 days, and then he had to do all the mixing and the editing and put it all together, and so we did the last one we did was just before COVID, we did Steether. We had another one, then COVID screwed everything up, but, uh, I'm waiting on Sony to give me permission. I wanna do a derivative work now with the old Muddy Waters song, "Mannish Boy," and nobody knows that title. They go, "I don't think I've heard that." I said, "Everybody's heard it." The beat goes da 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 da. Yep. We all know Mannish Boy, right? Uh, but it was a protest song at, published in 1955 where a black man cries, "I am a man." That's the cadence in there. People aren't aware of the significance of it. I am. And the blues gave rise to rock and roll, which gave rise to rap. So we've got a fusion we're trying to do where we go blues to rap to rock. And yeah, but Sony still had given me haven't said yes. So but that's gonna be the next music video. But we also wrote a script for Unit 514. Well, actually, a Hollywood writer approached me from Pardon the Disruption. He's written 2 scripts. We haven't gotten uh, Moonbase Alpha and God's Eye are 2 movie scripts. Moonbase Alpha is basically Die Hard on the Moon, and, God's Eye is a film noir where they're able to put a device on your head, scan your brain, and if you have the memory of the crime, that's admissible in court to prove you did it. But then this diabolical serial killer genius murders people, scans the memory, abducts people, downloads the memory into their brain, and then gives the police clues, and they're arresting innocent people. What have you been through? So this ultimate tool of equity has now been corrupted, right? I mean, 45 years in litigation, I I can construct a lot of things because I see how it all operates, right? And I've worn all the hats. But uh they still haven't said yes to either one of those. But we also wrote the script for 514. And my wife said, "It's a little dry though, courtroom deal. You need to," I said, "Well, have at it." So my wife, some religious fundamentalists pull lasers during the court battle and shoot up the courtroom. So there we go. So yeah, we went full Hollywood. The script is loosely based on the original short story. But at the end, the robot would then set out on this journey to make the world more equitable, more fair, and to protect the weak, which is once again, the AI has the capacity to be more humane than we are ourselves, because our history is written in blood. I mean, you look at what happened in World War II, hundreds of millions of people just slaughtered in that moment in time, and for what, right? And so, unfortunately, and I love science fiction, Terminator 2 and The Matrix, that's in my top 5. Total Recall, but they make technology foreboding, and it's our enemy, and, well, that's for the drama, and that's what makes it exciting, right? But the reason I have robots living in my home now, and, my wife's doing a show, Our Robot Family, and Uh, we've shot a lot of footage, and we were in LA last weekend, helping with fundraisers for the fire victims, and the robots were on display interacting with everyone. Uh, I want to normalize AI and robotics. It's coming, and the idea that they're coming for us, they don't have an emotional state. When you look at when people commit acts of violence against one another, that's homicidal rage. People don't dispassionately sit down and go, I think I should kill some people at random. It's our hormonal state overrides our rational brain, because a guy doing life in prison because he killed his ex-wife's new boyfriend, do you honestly think that was a rational decision? That was born of rage, of envy, of resentment. Those are emotional states. Machine intelligence, AI, it's not hobbled with that hormonal state. But then people immediately say, yeah, but then it could rationally decide that humans should be gotten rid of. Because it's easy to envision that, people think that it could easily happen. I don't believe that at all, uh, because there's not a reason to do that. However, in line with that, and that's another one of these fallacies that we're hobbled with the human brain. When somebody says, well, I'm worried that, they'll end the human race. I said, well, aren't you worried that a meteor is going to hit the earth and blow the atmosphere off and we're all going to immediately die? And they're like, well, I mean, I don't know. What are the chances that's going to happen? I said, about the same thing as the robots killing everybody. It can be easily thought of. So then people say that means it could easily happen. And they're not the same thing. And that's another one of those fallacies.
As you look into the future, what would you say some of the main benefits that you see coming? Because you've had you did some predictions up until this year. It's all come true. I find it interesting. You mentioned your book where you did that, um, but pardon the disruption, but you were targeting the legal industry with that book. So was it your own community, as you will, that was going, "You're nuts," or was it people outside of the lawyer community, a mix?
Yeah. No, I didn't write them for, you know, anyone that was curious about trying to understand the legal aspect of what a lot of this means, because socially, culturally, legally, we move like a glacier, right? Cultural norms will change, but they change over time. I mean, it took us 150 years to end slavery. We're now 100 years, 150 years post-slavery, and we're still dealing with it. Some of the nasty aspects of it. And, it's frustrating. But that is the human condition, whereas machine intelligence literally moves 1,000,000 times faster than the human mind. And because it's an exponential, we're now in the knee of the curve. In 5 years, I don't think we'll necessarily understand our world. And by 2040, 2045, I'm convinced the people that exist in this moment in time will not understand that world. And I think it's literally unknown. And I'm not alone in this. Uh, Brenner Singh coined the phrase singularity. Ray Kurzweil made it famous. The idea that we cannot see into that future, because with super intelligence, not artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence, where it is 1,000 times smarter than a human, how would we even begin to understand that? We're 1,000 times smarter than a dog. How would a dog even begin to understand the world we're creating for it? It may ride in the car with us to the grocery store with its head out the window, but it does not know what an internal combustion engine is. It does not understand how we're getting there. It may enjoy the wind in its face, but it is utterly clueless, and it doesn't know what a grocery store is or why we're there. It does not understand the world we've created. artificial superintelligence will be moving so fast, things are going to be changing right underneath our feet at a level, and we can't even begin to understand what that is. So I don't fear it. I see it as inevitable. And I think we need to embrace it. Um,
As as a violent species, I don't think anybody can argue with that. We've gotten less violent with time. That's been proven as well, but we're still a violent
True.
species.
Very true.
That is slow to change. In a sense, merging our world with a technology that is dispassionate, can mimic emotions, but is dispassionate, doesn't have that sense of I yet, that moves a million times faster. The promise of AI, do we get there without societal suffering, or do you think there's going to be whatever time frame where it's going to be so jarring that the world's going to be topsy turvy for a while?
Okay, now we're doing something that's dangerous. We're predicting the future with hard, you know, ideas. And the future has a way of making fools out of all of us. Because
Answeriness to this.
the future's unconcerned with what Clay and Robert think. It's gonna be what it will be. That said, understanding, you've invited me on a fool's errand. I will take that journey, right? And so I if you look at most of the conflicts throughout history, we've been fighting over scarce resources, right? Because historically, if there was a famine, if there was pestilence, if there was a drought, you know, people died. Massive portions of these communities just died of starvation, of exposure, whatever. And so other tribes, other groups, somebody that looked different, somebody that dressed different or whatever was suspect. Everyone was because, if you got covered, I mean, you know, eh, you got sold into slavery. I mean, you look what the Romans and the Greeks did, and Hannibal and the rest of them. I mean, it was just utter savagery, right? And yes, we're not that bad now, World War II notwithstanding, but it's still, human nature's still a pretty ugly mess. So what do I think? Is there going to be a lot of suffering? It depends on who gets to AGI first. If the Western world, the Northern European and the Northern Hemisphere, the U.S., Canada, uh, if they get there first, well, they're not going to be purely benevolent, right? They're going to be less problematic than if a surveillance state gets there first, or even worse, Russia or North Korea. If they were to get there first, we're going to be left at the tender mercies. And, obviously, I've now wandered into politics, so half your audience now hates my guts. But, uh, you know, Putin invaded Ukraine. Fact, uh, do we want him to have that kind of global power? I don't think so. And I don't think that's a radical idea. I think that's just common sense. But and
Or Xi or Kim Jong Un.
well, and that would be even worse. Uh, so I think we don't have a choice. When people say, "Well, we need to have a moratorium on this," they're not gonna. Please don't do that, because you know we hobble ourselves and lose this race. I cannot imagine a dumber decision to make. That said, getting there first, that incredible power also requires incredible maturity and incredible generosity of spirit, if you will. And I look at Nelson Mandela. I know we're capable of this. Nelson Mandela, he was in prison for 20, 21 years. more than 20 years, was imprisoned. And when he got out, instead of going on a revenge tour, he had the reconciliation committee. If you would confess everything you didn't get prosecuted. And they created a record of everything that had happened before and everything. And whatever you think of where South Africa is in the moment, Nelson Mandela himself showed us there's a way to be in this world that was truly amazing. Um, and he's not the only example. He's just a recent one in my lifetime. So I know it's possible, but that doesn't mean it's a guaranteed outcome. Um, I was a campus radical back in the 70s at UT. Long hair, fist in there, like, when people say, "Hey, what was your college experience like?" Well, in the early '70s at the University of Texas, my college experience was nightsticks and tear gas. Uh, you know, when you took to the streets saying that, simple message, people of color should be allowed to vote, that was enough. You got your ass kicked. There was a lot at stake. That's why when I see what people are complaining about now, it's like, "Oh, come on, grow up." Uh, but those real problems didn't go away. They are still here. They're not as bad, but they're still real. And I want to minimize that for a minute. That said, I went to law to take on the power structure, to fight the man. I did a student internship in the DA's office and encountered true evil, psychopathic, violent murderers, sexual predators. And I could no longer hold on to that naive ideology of cop bad, rebel good. No, and that's why I think that experience is why I don't have a rigid ideology to this day, because if I start giving into that, and the older you get, the easier it is to get into that. Um, all I have to do is look back to that moment when I realized, I had it wrong. And I take on corporate America, have for 35 years, for people that have their lives ruined. And corporate America, is just doesn't give a damn. And once again, that's not saying they're evil. It's not saying they're not evil. Our quality of life, our standard of living, all of that came from corporate America. I appreciate that, right? That said, when they make a mistake, when that 18-wheeler crushes the family van and kills the breadwinner, they're uninterested in making that right. And that's just another aspect of their exam. Once again, it's like I said, both things can be right, can be true at the same time. Corporate America has cured disease, has given us sanitation, has given us amazing air travel and all these magnificent things that enrich our lives. But it's at the same time this entity that tries to not admit when it makes mistakes and is uninterested in correcting those mistakes until you drag them down into a courtroom and force them to do the right thing. In 35 years, I think maybe 10 times out of well over 1,000 cases did a lawyer call me up before we even, as soon as we notified him we were handling the matter, immediately came forward and said, "Don't file a lawsuit. We want to make this right." And now a couple times they were lying. They didn't try and make it right. Lied to us about stuff. We sued them. There was a crane that will remain nameless that everybody knows the name, and they came in. Our guy had burned to death. They immediately denied any wrongdoing whatsoever, but they offered $1 million, thinking this poor family in the valley couldn't say no to $1 million. And so I'm not selling a burn death for $1 million. And this is back in the '90s. We it was 20 months of white hot litigation. They lied about everything. We exposed everything. It was just outrageous. Anyway, we got the family 4.4 million later on, after a real nasty fight. But, the original lawyers, uh, and they came out of Philadelphia. I thought that was rich. Just lying trash. That's just what they are. Now, once they had to litigate it in Texas, the Texas lawyers, and I'm not saying Philadelphia bad, Texas good, but this is just what happened. The local lawyers, knew they couldn't get away with that nonsense, and the whole plane altered immediately. Um, so yes, I've had corporate America come forward and make it right a few times voluntarily, and I thought that was amazing, but it's rare.
You think that if the West is the first to hit AGI and then ASI, that just like the experiences you've had before it, it'll be a both and of there's going to be bad things that happen, that good things that happen, or you more like a Ray Kurzweil where it's utopia. You definitely don't sound like a doomer. Where do you land within the spectrum of risk reward in terms of the power of AI and its ultimate development, and say, because I'm with you on timelines. So let's say 50, let's say 2020, 2045, 2045.
We're about to enter an age of abundance. Earlier I said almost all these wars, they're fought over scarcity and fear of, uh, survival. Uh, Societal, familial, it's all interconnected. So once you've got robots working 23 hours a day, spending an hour on the charging dock, and they're powered by solar power, which once you build the infrastructure, your energy now is going to zero, because you amortize the infrastructure over time. They're going to create things where suddenly all our products are going to go approaching zero. Now, they won't get to zero, but in the 1980s, a cell phone was the size of a brick. And if I wanted to call London, it was $5 a minute. Now I can call London and it's virtually free. I have unlimited minutes. And so, for $200 a month, I can be on the phone 24/7 all over the world, right? So it's not zero, but it ain't $5 a minute either. And so, and the phone ain't $5,000. I can get a phone for $200, really, really good one for 1,000. So that's that. Once it scales, and the term is goes to zero. It's a misnomer. It doesn't actually get to zero, but it goes there. So suddenly, a brand new car, instead of it being $60,000 to $100,000, your brand new car is $500. The cost of material with machine manufacturing handling all of it. So private ownership would become something we would lose interest in. Why would I want to own a car? I'd have to stick it in the garage and deal with it when I can just call one on my phone and it's a penny a mile. And so as all of this goes down and we're living in abundance, a lot of like property crimes, if your transportation's there, if your food, if all of that is there at these trivial prices, the need to steal and whatnot is going to dissipate, right? Um, so, and then this fear of survival, this scarcity that drives us to do cruel things, that is going to be removed from our existence. Well, we've never had that. We're on the verge of getting it. I hope that means we're all going to be a lot nicer to one another because we're no longer going to see each other as a competitor, in terms of survival. The, uh, the real problem I see is not production, it's how we're gonna distribute this, because right now we have a capitalist system, it's a three-legged stool. Finance, the factory, the labor. Labor trades as labor for money to buy the product, which is the demand, so the factory can then pay back finance that loaned them the money to build. It's that benevolent triangle, right? And that system has been amazing, right? Uh, so, and I mean, I am, a free world capitalist myself. I've been in this system my entire life. But we had barter systems before that. We had all kinds of other economic systems. But, in the 1600s, they came up with the joint stock company. So now all of a sudden we've got this capitalist system. It's a couple hundred years old. But, our recorded history is 8,000, right? That, that was new in terms of how long we've had it. The idea that in the 1700s they invented the greatest system ever and it's not subject to being improved is ridiculous. And that's why the hardcore conservative of this now and forever, to my mind, is not understanding this. If there's no longer a need for human labor, you can't tell the guy to get a job. There will be, right now, if somebody doesn't have a job, it could be moral malaise. It could be they're lazy, whatever. You could ascribe those qualities to them. But in the future, once robotic and machine intelligence displaces all human labor, not having a job is not moral malaise. It's not like they're not there. And so then we have to find a way to distribute resources to the human race in a way that makes sense. Universal basic income is one idea. I'm sure there's going to be 100 other ideas, right? But when you say universal basic income, then immediately you're labeled a communist. Well, that's ridiculous. It's not communism, but it's a recognition that the plan we have, or the system we have in this moment, is going to lose one of the legs on that three-legged stool, and so it will fall. And it's just evolution. We have gone through all these evolutionary periods. Well, we're about to go through another one. Unfortunately, in the past, a grandfather could teach his grandson how to till the soil, and then the grandson could feed his family. What the grandfather knew was relevant. Grandparents now have very little to offer their grandchildren on how to navigate the world 10 years from now because they don't have any idea what it's going to be. They think they do, and they may be convinced they don't. And so as each generation becomes less and less relevant in what it can inform that up and coming generation, that is this problem I see is how are we going to navigate this? And so could it be yeah, it could all go to hell in a handbasket. It doesn't have to though, but really creative, smart people with the aid of these artificial intelligence agents are hopefully going to get us to the next best plateau for the human race, but it's not guaranteed. We split the atom, right? It will create extremely inexpensive electricity, but it also incinerated 2 cities in the blink of an eye and killed hundreds of thousands of people. So these technologies that we're creating are extremely powerful, and in the right hand, they're benevolent. They make electricity, they warm your home, they cook your food. In the wrong hands, they're extremely destructive. So,
Yeah.
I must
From democracy, it's the best governmental system that we have. I would argue that for the last while, capitalism is the best system to allocate scarce resources. But I'm in agreement with you that time is coming to an end. Nobody's really cried over uh, self-checkout and the loss of cashier jobs. Um, no one really thinks about because so many factories have closed over time. Nobody's really thinking about the workers that have been displaced continually by improved automation. I think when the autonomous vehicles, we really pin them down and we lose a million truckers in the United States alone, that'll be a different discussion. I know people are upset right now about the federal workers. And there's going to be some transferable skills, but it's going to be hard to take a purebred bureaucrat and put them into a capitalist system that's looking for efficiency. So we're going to have challenges there. And then like if you take a 55-year-old trucker with a high school education that's used to making 75,000, 90,000, whatever that is, can't teach them to code. And we're already learning ChatGPT. Sam Altman said that the internal GPT that they're using on the competitive coding test, it's now ranked 50th in the world, and that by the end of this year, it's going to be number one. So now you're going to get rid of what, 98% of all software engineers. Um, uh, Salesforce, they're not hiring any new engineers this year because of the efficiencies that they found with AI while increasing productivity over 30%. So when people can't find work that are skilled, and then you start seeing whole industries that we can't absorb, I agree with you. We're going to have to find something. And so when I asked you earlier about, is there this sort of valley between now and when it gets great, that's what's in my head when I think about it. I was talking with my financial advisor recently about stocks that we need to look at that will benefit from mass unemployment. The My company works with service-based business owners, and one of the they don't we don't really talk about AI necessarily. We have the platform. AI provides the intelligence that helps them with their business, but what they need are real world services to get where they're at. But in my head, I'm sitting there thinking, I need to help the people that hire me make enough money as quickly as possible so that not only are they taking care of themselves, their families, and their communities, but they have enough resources left over to invest in the American economy. Because that's one thing I'm still betting on, that we can win the AI race. That even if their business collapses because of technological advancements, it can still benefit from the growth of the economy. So that's where my head's at.
Two things. First, anybody that would bet against America is a fool because you got 250 years of data that says do not bet against the United States, right? And that's not me being uber patriotic. That's another fact, right? And like it or not, this country wins a lot. And so and with good reason. We work our tails off. And I am very pro-American. I grew up with my dad served during Korea. I spent 5 years in the DA's office, when I was sending cartel scum to prison for corrupting our society. Periodically I'd get death threats. I had to carry a gun for 10 years. It was uncomfortable. But I, you know, every time one of those clowns threatened to murder me and wipe out that file never left my desk. Those guys died in prison. But that's me, right? My two son-in-laws, both U.S. Army. One served in Iraq. The other served in Afghanistan. My middle daughter, Sarah, served in Afghanistan, got a combat action badge. She was on a rescue mission, shot it out with the Taliban through the open door of a Black Hawk. And keep in mind, this is somebody who used to say, Sarah, shut up, go to your room and do your homework. But she wound up being that. Anyway, she's now a warrant officer, and she flies the Apache attack helicopter. She's a combat pilot, and she went through SEER, all that difficulties and everything. She's extraordinary. Um, so yeah, my family, and my father-in-law was a lifer in the 82nd Airborne. My family has fought and bled for this country, and without apologies. Um, so yeah, I truly love America, but that doesn't mean America always gets it right. And this idea of uh, you know, uh, America exceptionalism, we're exceptional just because, right? Or manifest. I think that's dangerous. No, we earn this because we work hard. And, you know, if we suddenly start assuming it will always be without putting in the hard work, we're gonna hit the rocks. And so, but the evolution of the job loss in the 1700s, when we had the steam engines, we were burning wood in those boilers to create steam. But the need for energy and power got so immense, wood, what were we gonna clear cut the whole forest? And then there was no wood, right? So we switched to coal. We were digging it out of the ground. It was a denser energy source, right? But then we overran our need for power overran what coal could do for us. So then we went to oil and fuel and the aviation fuels and all these other components that come from oil, right? And oil got us. So when we went from burning wood to coal, the lumberjacks got fired. When we went from coal to oil, the miners got fired. Now we're at that sunset period for oil because we're going to the alternatives. And I'm not saying renewables, I'm saying alternatives because I include nuclear in that. And to my anti nuke brothers and sisters, 3 Mile Island happened 52 years ago. There's been some improvements in the architectural design of nuclear power plants. Run fifth generation. Stop screaming 3 Mile Island. Yes, that was dangerous. Yes, they needed to immediately make corrective measures. You were right 53 years ago. You are wrong in 2025. And this goes back to what I said, throne and anger. If you're going to live in the past, it's a democracy you get to. But the seasoned minds need to just ignore that noise. And people need to understand where that comes from. They fixated on a thing and the fact that they were right 53 years ago doesn't mean they're right now. We have the pebble bed reactor, the fissurable materials in those ball bearings. You lay out the tray, it's going to be a set amount of heat. You're not running rods into a core where you could have the possibility of a meltdown. This is fifth generation architecture. They solve those problems. We need nuclear, along with wind, solar, geothermal, all the alternatives. And we've got to get off burning hydrocarbon. Uh, and I don't want to get into a global warming argument. All I'm saying is it's a finite resource. At some point, you would run out of oil. We know that. So if oil gives us another 200 or 300 years, let's not get up to year 299 before we go, oh, I guess we got to get off. Let's get off now when we still have plenty. So it's an easy transition. Now, we're going to get a supernova from our sun, maybe in a billion years, but I'd rather get off the resource that's got 300 years in the ground and switch to the resource that's got a billion years on the clock. That's, to my mind, a more reasoned way to do it. But so we went wood, coal, oil. Oil has a lot of money and they, to some degree, have corrupted our government. They're not willing to leave peacefully. That's obvious. Massive misinformation campaigns. They always said, well, we'll have solar when it can compete with oil. What people didn't understand is that the price at the pump did not reflect the cost of oil. And they're saying, well, we don't want any subsidies for solar. We had to park aircraft carriers in '06 when Bush was president. We had the aircraft carriers to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, to keep the flow of oil running, right? We spent $3 trillion in Iraq to keep the oil flowing. We spent, I forget how many billions to have the aircraft carriers rotating to the Strait of Hormuz to keep, so they couldn't choke off the oil. None of that the taxpayers bore all that expense. None of that was shown at the gas pump. So for them to say, well, we shouldn't be giving any kind of subsidy to solar, who are you kidding? And there's no honesty in these debates. Both sides just lie. And because I've been in litigation for 45 years, I spent 45 years demonstrating conclusively who the liar was. And, I don't get paid unless I win. Every time I go in on a case, if I don't have a case, I don't get paid. So it's hard to hire me. People think, well, a lawyer will take anything. Wrong. It is difficult to hire me. I got to know it's a real case or I'm uninterested because I know how sharp the focus will be in that crucible called the courtroom.
So admittedly, I don't know a lot about lawyers, and I don't usually. I mean, I'm going to pay a compliment where a compliment is due. The way I'm seeing your story so far, life is hard, and we have to struggle, even in a rich, safe country like the United States. You still have to bust your hump, get stuff done, build something for yourself, add value to others in order to have a life and take care of your family. And I hadn't really thought about lawyers in that term, in that way of you don't get paid unless you win in your circumstances as a litigator. But even earlier, I was thinking this at the beginning of our conversation of having to be prepared again and again and again for people that were coming after you. Um, so not only as an entrepreneur, but as just in your role that you chose to take care of yourself, your family, and your community, that battle and being willing to be prepared every time and being willing to get better each time you won or lost, reflect and grow. Um, I think that's a valuable lesson for a lot of people today. And I'm going to say, especially for young men, to take that mindset that you've lived and to do something about it. So I applaud you for that.
I have always told young lawyers, women, you need to be the total warrior. If all you are is a bombastic bully, your career will be short and brutal. Because the world will line up for you. You're going to need to be that bombastic bully, that over the top guy 5% of the time. But for the other 95, if they need a professional, you better be in a suit. If they need an academic, you better know the law. If they need somebody prepared, you better know the facts. And if they need humor, you better be the funniest guy in the room. You have to be the total warrior to get to yes 95% of the time. And then occasionally you got the congenital liar, the hammerhead, the total idiot. And then, yeah, you got to be able to throw heat. But you're not going to have to do that most of the time. Now, when it's needed, though, if you don't have it, all's lost because that other side, that bully is coming for you. But it it's not difficult. You just need to have that moral compass and just live by it. The other thing too, I wanted to say, I tell young lawyers, guard your reputation. Uh, in fact, I even memorized a Shakespearean quote. Shakespeare said, "He that steals my purse steals trash, but he that steals my good name takes that which doth not enrich him yet leaves me poor. You only have your name. And occasionally, I've been in tough fights where then people would misrepresent what happened in the court. I would follow them down, and I would tell them, "You will not misrepresent what happened in that courtroom, what I did, what I said," and I would always follow that to ground to not allow that to proliferate. Um, I, on 3 occasions I'm 70 now, right? I'm a lover, not a fighter. But as a young lawyer, there was a couple lawyers I called outside to fight. They wouldn't go, but, uh, you cannot let them, you know, take your name, because they will, and, you only have one reputation. You've gotta guard it zealously.
There's 2 things that it looks like you're promoting to me. One, I think I understand, and the other one I'm curious about. See if you wanna, highlight these. You mentioned your Unitree G1 Android that you have at the house. I saw a post, I think it was maybe your son-in-law that was saying, "Hey, looking for an operator of one of these. Maybe you're going on tour." Is that to promote, um, the benefit of Androids? What are you thinking? What's that about?
Yeah. No, I'm trying to normalize that. We were all over Hollywood last weekend, and, there's a lot of videos now proliferating because we went to a number of venues and, had the robots interacting with people and, got a lot of, real positive response. And, we're gonna be in Hollywood next weekend, at one of the venues where they live stream the Academy Awards, and they give out awards themselves. It's in the Hyatt at Universal Studios, and, the robots are gonna be on a fashion show along with the models. It's a fundraiser for the fire victims, so, it's charity work, and it's a lot of fun, but I have, and yes, we're looking for some robot operators to help us advance the software. We need them as operators, but also to help us advance this operational capacity, right? Because we're on a journey and we're at the genesis of it, right? They're primitive at this point. I mean, obviously, my dog telling me, you know, how to understand AGI and how to navigate the stock market, that's extremely advanced. That's just the beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg. And so it's an adventure, it's a journey that I and my wife was willing to go on it with me, thank God. So we're having a blast. But I'm also in a startup called Wire Network, and they call me the OG because I wrote that first check in 2018 thinking it was a 2-year play. In fact, tomorrow I'll be at Denver ETH, with the Wire Network team, and, they're about to go live. The reason it matters is this: Web 1 was just an idea for 20 years. They all talk about Web 1 until that first email went from one computer to another. Web 1 was just conversation. It was an idea. But in that moment, we had Web 1. Well, then Web 2 was going to be commerce and it was going to be great, right? They yacked about that for 20 years. But then, and the conventional wisdom was no one in their right mind would give a credit card number anonymously over the internet to some vendor. No, there's no one's going to trust. Oh, wrong. Okay. So when that first card swiped and UPS delivered a product that was ordered over the internet in an instant, Web 2 existed. Unfortunately, Web 2 is centralized. So the large institutions, I'm not going to name them, we all know who they are. They stole our IP, they took our identity, they ripped us off. You put those photos up on some of those deals, you donated that to them, and then they monetized it and made money off it, which makes us all a bunch of suckers. And nobody knew that. Yeah, we all know what's happening now. That's why everybody's mad.
If nobody heard the product, you are the product.
Exactly. So, but none of us knew in the infancy that that's what was going on. It was cynical, right? So, Web 3 is the decentralization of the internet where we have our own identity, we own our IP, we will monetize our own IP, right? They've been talking about it for 20 years. You hear about Web 3.0 all the time. It does not physically exist in the world in this moment, but it's about to. Now, Wire Network created the technology, and I mean, it's black box. I mean, they made it from scratch. They made it from the metal up. Uh, these kids are geniuses, and I'm the only boomer in the room. And the only reason I'm in the room is because I wrote. I mean, I get to hang out with this incredible intelligence, and one of the kids, early 20s. I'm 70, right? These One of the young men said, "Miss Rise, it's really cool that a lawyer of your renown would be willing to hang out with us." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You guys earned your seat at the table. You are literally inventing the future." I said, "I bought my seat at the table. And trust me, there is a difference. And don't think for a minute I'm not aware of that difference." I said, "I'm thrilled you guys would let me in the room where I see the future actually being created." And so what Wire Network could do is you've got one wallet, but all your digital assets go on it because they created universal polymorphic address protocol where right now you got Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, Doji, right? These are all information silos. They cannot communicate with them. They found ways to have them all communicate across these silos, information silos. Now, historically, we've got it. They would either bridge them from one to one to one, created a bridge. But if you do that, that bridge is a point of attack, right? That's a vulnerability. The ones that didn't use bridges used an oracle. Well, now you have centralized the decentralization, which is what we were after, and you've completely defeated the very purpose of us doing this, right? So, once again, not the solution, right? But that's what we've been stuck with, Oracle and bridges. Because they created this technology that will allow cross-chain communication without bridges and without an oracle and still remaining decentralized, if adopted, we will have Web 3.0. And it will be decentralized and it will be on the blockchain. But, and I mean, I can't say enough about how smart these young men are. And women, I mean, I'm old, choose the pronouns. It's just old habit. Um, they, they're going to give you Web 3, but with a Web 2 experience. You can still click the mouse and the icons. You're not gonna, I mean, originally to get on the computer, you had to know Python or, some coding thing, right? But then Windows showed up where you just click icons and suddenly anybody could navigate, right? That was when we all adopted them. This is the same thing. To get to Web 3, they want to get us to Web 3 without you having to understand the blockchain, without you having to code, without you having to do any of that. They're going to, what Windows did, they put all the technology behind a curtain so that you could just interact without understanding any of that. I liken it to, I can drive a car without knowing the science behind an internal combustion engine and how you vaporize gas with a spark to get an explosion in a compressed cylinder, right? I don't need to know any of that. The right pedal means go and the left pedal means stop, right? So, and I steer with the wheel. So this is the same thing here. They've put all that technology behind the curtain, and I'm really excited. Them going live is imminent. And like I said, I've been there since 2018. They call me the OG. Uh, and I'm really excited for what's about to happen. So they will allow AI agents to operate on their platform. All your digital existence can operate on that platform. It's the next revolution.
That's extremely exciting. AI agents is that I can't imagine that not being the term that we say is the term of 2025. What piece of advice would you give to an entrepreneur of any age at this point in society's evolution about either self control, running a business, how to plan in the future? What is important for them to hear right now?
Well, I think a lot of well-meaning people did a disservice to young people when they said, "Follow your passion." I think that's bullshit. You know, if somebody really likes history and they get $250,000 in debt getting a degree in history from an elite university, and now all they can do with a degree in history is teach history, they're screwed. They're buried alive, okay? But they were following their passion. You What I tell all small business people is you have to keep control of your fixed costs. They will eat you alive, right? My partner and I, when early on, we bought a 3-story house, converted it into 5 law offices, and it was me and Keith, and we had a number of lawyers leasing from us. And we thought, well, we got a fixed asset that appreciate in value. We're not paying rent anymore. Okay. All of that was true. Would I advise somebody to buy the infrastructure, the brick and mortar for all those advantages? No, I would not. Because, about 5 years ago, we sold it, and, of course, it didn't appreciate it, all that was true, but, we'd been paying $10,000-$12,000 in property tax every year. We had to pay the electricity. We had to rehab the building twice because it was 85 years old. So, the profit that it looked like we made at the end, we just got our money back. So we were there rent free, right? But we had all the aggravation and stress of doing all that stuff. Now we rented the 7th floor with a number of other lawyers. And so we're all here on the 7th floor, with a conference room. We just pay a monthly rent and that's it. You don't worry about electricity. The owner of the building, it's a 10-story, brick ornate old structure. I mean, we love the infrastructure, right? But property taxes, electricity bills, maintenance, none of that. We don't have to deal with any of it. And you know what that bill will be once a month. Now we're not, creating equity. But what I would point out is when you're creating equity, if you're not creating enough equity, you're just treading water. You're fooling yourself. And so I think renting for most entrepreneurs is the best way to go early on so that you just have that one nut you've got to make each month without all the other collateral stuff. Because if you buy the building and then the AC goes out and they tell you it's 5,000, in Houston, Texas, you can't operate without AC. I mean, the interior building can go 140 degrees, right? And so it adds a whole new meaning to sweatshop. So you you can't know these things, right? And you could say, well, I had the building inspected, the AC was sound. Yeah. And then we had a 1,000-year flood. It went underwater, shorted out. There was a lightning strike, blew the transformer. You cannot predict, and this is what I said, you can't predict the future with certainty. So for young entrepreneurs, stay as lean as humanly possible early on so that your burn rate doesn't overrun whatever capital you have to operate with so that you can survive long enough to reach that critical mass where then it's all profitable and it feeds itself.